Hi, this is Kathy. I am going to give you a presentation on bilirubin in the newborn, physiological jaundice versus pathological jaundice. When a baby is born, they have lots of red blood cells. Generally speaking, whenever they have any toxins or anything else in the neonate, the mother takes care of it in the fetal development. But what happens is once the baby is born, they have a lot of red blood cells that begin to break down. And these are red blood cells that are are damaged during birth, especially with bruising or cephalohematoma or any type of trauma to the baby. And these blood cells, which are fragile. They're fetal red blood cells. They're a little bit more fragile than the adult, but they begin to break down. And there's lots of them. Now remember, inside the red blood cell, you have a hemoglobin. The hemoglobin is a heme and a globin. When that red blood cell splits, what happens is the hemoglobin splits and a bilirubin is deposited into the red blood into the bloodstream. Now, bilirubin is not a rock star or a soccer player, not bilirubin. It is bilirubin, one word. But one thing of remembering is, if you remember bilirubin as being a little yellow-green Martian, you'll remember that these are not good things to have in your bloodstream. So every time these red blood cells break, they break open and they deposit a little bilirubin. Now the bilirubin has to, in order to get out of the body, it has to be conjugated, in other words, rubber stamped by the liver. If it doesn't get rubber stamped by the liver, it escapes and it goes into the bloodstream, and that's where they cause lots of problems. Now, right after birth, when all of these red blood cells are breaking, they start clamoring towards the liver, which is the reason why right at birth, the baby's bilirubin is normal. And it doesn't occur until about 3 days later because these red blood cells are breaking and some of this bilirubin is filtering through the liver. But I'd like to think that the newborn's liver is not so much immature but inexperienced, because what happens is in the liver, this bilirubin starts getting through, and then because there's so much bilirubin, it starts to back up. So some of it gets conjugated, rubber stamp, goes through the liver, and then it gets excreted through the intestines, through stool, which is the reason why your stool is brown. And it also will get excreted. It may go back into the system, but get excreted through the kidneys, and that's the reason why your urine is yellow. So it has to get excreted. Now, the bilirubin that does not go through the liver, because there's such a backup, there's so much of it, it's unconjugated. And it's sort of like someone tweeted that there was free pizza and beer at the liver for all the bilirubins, and they all just kind of line up. And they all sort of get bored from the line being so long, and they decide, well, I'm going into the blood vessels. So they escape. They escape and they wreak havoc. They start to attach themselves to adipose tissue, and the worst of all, it can attach to the brain. So we don't want unconjugated bilirubin to be circulating through the body. But that's basically what happens, is there's a breakdown of red blood cells with lots of bilirubin. Much of it goes to the liver, but because there's so much of it, because of the breakdown, they accumulate into the blood. There are a number of reasons why red blood cells break down, or it's also called hemolysis of red blood cells. Bruising, if a baby is born with lots of bruising, or vaginal birth and has bruising, those babies are going to have red blood cells that break down. And therefore, around 3 to 5 days, you're going to see an increase in bilirubin in their blood levels. Cephalohematoma, which is like someone hitting you over the head with a baseball bat and you get this egg noggin that's full of blood on top of your head, that's a cephalohematoma, and it contains blood, and those blood vessels break down, and every blood cell that breaks down, you get bilirubin. You have physiological destruction of red blood cells. If mom has a different blood type than baby and they start to hemolyze the red blood cells, you'll have more red blood cells breaking down. Thereby, you have more bilirubin. You also have pathological destruction of red blood cells, and that's in another video called RH incompatibility, where you have red blood cells destruction due to antibodies. So all of this hemolysis gets into the blood. It's unconjugated bilirubin. It goes into the bloodstream. Unconjugated bilirubin, if it doesn't go to the liver, gets attached to the subcutaneous fat, the adipose tissue, and stains blood tissue. If it does get into the liver, which it hopefully eventually will, it becomes conjugated. And once it's conjugated, and then it can go through the liver and through the bile, it gets out through the intestines, and it gets excreted also with the kidneys. So that's the pathway that occurs with red blood cells and bilirubin. Now, physiological jaundice is defined as immaturity in the bilirubin metabolism. And it's the liver that's immature. The metabolism in the liver just can't handle the amount of bilirubin that they have to detox, has to filter. Babies never had to do that before. Mothers always took care of bilirubin metabolism. So now they're immature. They don't know how to do this. It takes them a while. But once they figure it out, once the liver figures it out, in around 5-6 days, it no longer is a problem. It's just at the very beginning. So the characteristics of physiological jaundice are that it first appears in 24 to 72 hours of age. After 24 hours of age. The maximum intensity is generally right around the 4th to 5th day, because what happens is the liver figures out how to get rid of it. And then clinically it's undetectable. In other words, there is no jaundice seen in the baby. In other words, the skin is no longer yellow. You cannot notice any yellowness of the skin after 2 weeks. No treatment is required unless the jaundice worsens or the levels of the bilirubin in the blood rises. And that is a medical dilemma, and there's a decision made about what kinds of treatments that will occur if the bilirubin rises too fast. But one of the things that you do need to remember is the bilirubin doesn't even start rising until after 24 hours. If it rises before then, that means something happened in utero, and that is pathological. That is not normal under any circumstances. Okay, so here is a graph of what the bilirubin levels look like. You can see at birth they're right around 0. They're really low. And by the way, your bilirubin level, if you are normal, have a normal liver, is right around 0. And that's just about what it is for a neonate at birth. And then about 24 hours of age, it begins to climb. And then right around 3 to 5 days, it peaks. It continually rises, it peaks, and then it levels off, and then the liver figures out how to metabolize it, how to get rid of that bilirubin. It stabilizes, and then it begins to drop down, and then it never rises again after it drops down. It's resolved. Bilirubin and clinical outcomes occurs with deposits of the bilirubin. If there's enough unconjugated bilirubin, it deposits in the skin and the mucous membranes, and the baby looks jaundiced. In other words, it's yellow, and they do distinctly look yellow. They have yellow at the eyes, yellow at the skin. If you press down on their skin, you'll see the yellow cast to it, and that's all because of the excess unconjugated bilirubin in the blood. If it deposits in the brain, which is bad, it is called bilirubin encephalopathy, or also kernicterus, and it's permanent. And many of these babies who do not have detection of bilirubin as a newborn, they grow up with signs and symptoms of kernicterus. Unfortunately, some of the signs and symptoms of kernicterus are some of the same with lots of other neurological, especially brain neurological defects, such as mental retardation or lower IQ. So it's not really detected until an autopsy where you see the yellowing of the brain. But they do know that the bilirubin does tend to move into the bloodstream and attach itself to brain tissue, which is the reason why we do not like to have bilirubin levels elevated in the newborn. If the bilirubin gets a little bit too high for the size of the baby, a physician may then order what's called phototherapy. And phototherapy is a light source. It's the same light wave as the sun. It was discovered by a nurse who took a jaundice baby, put him by the window, and discovered that the areas where the sun hit over a matter of time, that yellowness was disappearing. So they did some studies. They found that a wavelength actually helps break down that unconjugated bilirubin that settles into the skin and into the adipose, and it helps release it. It helps conjugate it so the babies can get rid of it. So there are many types of phototherapy on the market. Some are just the lights, and you can see this baby's eyes have little shades to them so they don't harm their eyes. They also always wear diapers because they want to protect the gonads, whether it's a girl or a boy. So the babies are exposed, the main body and the extremities are exposed to the phototherapy itself. Fiber optic blankets are also available, and these basically have the fiber optic bands, the light bands within a blanket, and the baby is wrapped in it. If the bilirubin is severe, they will actually do a blood transfusion. In other words, they'll take a little bit of blood out, like 10 milliliters of blood out, and put 10 milliliters of fresh blood in, 10 milliliters of blood out, and 10 milliliters of fresh blood in, until they get rid of this conjugated bilirubin within the baby's system. That's basically what I have for the physiological jaundice. Please remember, physiological is expected and pathological is not good. So what is expected is that it rises around 3 to 5 days and then drops off. What's not expected is for a baby to be born with jaundice, or if the bilirubin rises too high after 7 days, and that then again becomes pathological. That's all I have. Thanks for listening. See you later.